At least one person at that wedding wasn't pretending. My mother had her arm wrapped around my sister Brienne, beaming the way she beamed for cameras, and then her eyes landed on me. Not a glance, an assessment. The kind you'd give a chipped plate you forgot to throw out before guests arrived. 40-some relatives went quiet around the head table. 40 pairs of eyes locked onto the woman in the navy blazer standing near the gift table with a glass of Prosecco she hadn't touched. My mother tilted her chin, voice pitched just loud enough to carry. 41 years old, no husband, no children, flying a desk for the government and calling it a career. At least one of my daughters knows how to build a life. The table laughed. Not a polite ripple, a full permission-granted roar, the kind that only happens when the matriarch fires first and everyone decides it's safer to laugh along than to sit in the silence. I didn't flinch, didn't set my glass down too hard. I looked past her, past the contoured cheekbones and the champagne flush, past 41 years of being told I was the disappointment, and I said one word, Atlas. A fork clattered onto a china plate 3 tables back. By the bar, a man in his late 60s, broad through the shoulders even with a slight stoop now, silver hair cropped close, a faded poppy pin on his lapel out of season, went pale. His scotch glass slipped out of fingers that had, 20 minutes earlier, been steady enough to carve the head table's centerpiece roast. He set the glass down hard enough that the ice cracked. Wait, he said, voice low and rough like gravel under a tire. Say that again, Atlas, I repeated. He stood up so fast his chair nearly went over. Then, in front of my mother, in front of the 40-some relatives who'd just been howling at her joke, the old man, Hugh, my cousin's father-in-law, a name on the seating chart I'd barely registered an hour earlier, squared his shoulders and snapped a salute so crisp it didn't belong in a Niagara-on-the-Lake banquet hall. The laughter died standing up. Before I tell you why a man who'd done 2 tours and buried friends in places most of these relatives couldn't find on a map was suddenly shaking at the sound of a code name, hit that like button and subscribe, because what happened in the next 10 minutes was something none of them saw coming. Hugh lowered his hand. He didn't look at my mother with the deference a guest owes a host's family. He reached into his jacket, the kind of motion that's been drilled into a body so many times it doesn't need permission, and pulled out a worn manila folder, corners soft from handling, one edge mended with packing tape gone yellow. He laid it on the white tablecloth and fanned out a dozen clippings. Newsletters from a Legion branch in Petawawa. A redacted incident report with half the page blacked out by Ottawa censors. Nothing with my name on it, nothing with my face. But every call sign, every unit reference, every operational window had been circled in blue pen. Every time something with this call sign came across my desk, Hugh said, voice still rough, I clipped it. People who do what she did don't talk about it. So somebody had to keep the record. The room had gone past quiet into something closer to held breath. 40-some people who shared my blood knew less about me than a stranger with a manila folder. I didn't say anything. I picked up my Prosecco, set it back down in the exact ring of condensation it had already left on the cloth. I wasn't watching Hugh. I wasn't watching my mother. I was reading the room the way I'd been trained to read a room, scanning faces. My Uncle Pete was suddenly very interested in his shoe. My cousin Tasha had her phone half raised, like she wanted to film it, but her thumb had frozen on the button. My mother was waiting for me to crack. That was always the next scene in her script. Maya gets emotional. Maya makes it weird. Maya proves, once again, she's the problem. My silence was the one thing she'd never rehearsed a counter for. She recovered fast. She always did. Her voice dropped into that warm, patient register she used when explaining something to someone she considered slow. Hugh, that's very sweet of you, but you know how veterans get. Maya has always had a flair for the dramatic. Even as a kid, she lived in her head. A small ripple of laughter went through the nearby tables. Relief, mostly, the sound of people grateful someone had diffused it before it got real. My sister Brienne leaned in next, brow furrowed in manufactured concern, timing it like she'd rehearsed it in the bathroom mirror. Maya, are you okay? You seem really tense. The question wasn't concern. It was repositioning, taking me from a woman who'd just received a salute and turning me, in front of 40 witnesses, into a woman who needed to be managed. Not impressive, unstable. They never argued with Hugh directly. They just made everyone wonder if I was the kind of person you should believe. I set my glass down, 4 seconds in, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds out. I stood, walked over to Hugh, and shook his hand, firm, brief, eye to eye. Thank you for being here, Master Corporal. His eyebrows lifted half an inch. I'd used his rank without being told it. He leaned in, voice dropping below the noise of the room. Don't know if you remember a Colonel Whitford. He's getting the VME Award next month in Ottawa, funded by a foundation built off donations from the families of men he left behind in Kandahar. One beat, I nodded once. I didn't stay for the cake. I sat in my Subaru in the church parking lot with the engine off, windows up, hands on the wheel at 10 and 2, the way I used to sit before a mission brief. When I reached over to move my mother's purse off the passenger seat, she'd handed it to me to watch 2 hours earlier and then forgotten it existed. My fingers brushed against a photo tucked in the side pocket. A family shot from the year I turned 16. My mother in the center, one arm around Brienne, the other around my brother-in-law's shoulder, even though he wasn't married into the family yet, just always somehow already in the frame. A dozen relatives clustered tight around them like petals folding toward the center of a flower. I was at the far edge, half-cropped, no hand on my shoulder, not because I'd chosen to stand apart, because that was the space left over once everyone else had already claimed the people who mattered. My 16-year-old face in that photo wasn't sad, it was flat. The face of someone who'd already learned that being overlooked wasn't an event, it was the climate. The memories didn't come in order after that, they came in pieces. The year I was accepted into the officer training program, my mother didn't ask the date of the ceremony, didn't write it on the calendar that hung by the fridge for 30 years. The year Brienne made junior partner at her law firm, my mother booked the private room at the steakhouse 2 weeks out, called every aunt and uncle personally. The year I mailed home my first commendation, still in its government envelope, she dropped it unopened into the hall closet. What am I supposed to do with a piece of metal? The year Brienne got engaged, my mother posted 9 photos with the caption "My girl, finally settled." Not once. Not an accident. A system maintained with the same precision year after year. Brienne was seen. I was tolerated. The sharpest memory was the kitchen, age 17, telling my mother I wanted to apply to the Royal Military College. She didn't get angry. She got sorry for me, voice gentle, the tone you'd use to explain a diagnosis. Oh honey, girls who don't have other options join the military, not an attack. A verdict delivered before any evidence was in. Beside her at the counter, Brienne kept painting her nails and didn't look up. She never had to. My mother held the knife. Brienne just held the door open. That was the first time I understood, with total clarity, that my mother hadn't merely doubted me. She decided, long before I was old enough to prove anything, that this particular daughter had no ceiling worth raising. The decision was made once and never revisited. Not in 25 years. I put the photo in the glove box. Didn't throw it out. Kept it the way you keep evidence you might need someday. 19 years I'd lived by something a flight instructor told me on my first week of training. Trust the instruments, not the panic. Every posting, every file, every person I'd helped bring home safe had been an answer that didn't need words. But after that name had left my lips at the head table and Hugh had murmured about Ottawa, something shifted. Not in me, around me. This time, the truth wasn't going back in a drawer to be silent for another decade. Fall of 2014. 3 in the morning, Kandahar province, a dust storm rolling in off the ridgeline so thick you couldn't tell if your eyes were open. We'd had 2 soldiers caught in an ambush corridor, one already wounded, comms cutting in and out like a bad radio station. Command's order came through clear as a church bell, all air assets return to base, full stop. Underneath that, a second voice, Colonel Robert Whitford, calm as a man ordering takeout. Cut losses. All air assets RTB. That's final. I was strapped into the helicopter when the last call broke through the static. A voice too young for the situation, a private barely 20, first deployment, first real fight, learning in real time that support could mean nothing at all. He didn't scream. 4 words, small and clear, like a kid asking to be carried. Somebody, please, please. My co-pilot, a guy named Desmond, 26, 3 weeks from rotating home to a wife and a daughter he'd only seen in photos, looked at me. I watched the exact second he understood we were going anyway. He didn't argue. He cinched his harness, 1 notch tighter, and said 2 words. Your bird. I flew into the storm. We took the first hit 2 minutes past the ridge. Warning lights cascading across the panel. I killed the audio because I needed the sound of the rotors more than I needed the machine screaming that we were dying. Blind landing in sand that felt like another planet, navigating off compass heading, and the feel of my own hands on the controls. When the cargo door slid open, the first body hauled aboard was unconscious, lighter than I expected, his fingers locking onto my collar like the last reflex of a man going under. I didn't let go. We took a second hit on the climb out, hard enough to rattle my teeth. I still didn't let go. 4 came home that night. 1 didn't make it, but the kid with the frozen fingers did. Whitford had connections 2 ranks above his pay grade and a survival instinct that outweighed his conscience by a wide margin. Within 72 hours, charges landed on my desk like they'd been pre-drafted. Insubordination, endangering a joint operation, reckless disregard for the chain of command. Every word built to make me the threat instead of the storm, the ambush, or the man who'd ordered 2 soldiers abandoned from a climate-controlled command tent. An anonymous source, the kind of anonymous that wears a colonel's insignia, fed the story to a national paper. Rogue pilot disobeys direct orders, risks entire op for personal glory. Nobody printed the part about 4 soldiers coming home. Nobody asked Desmond what happened in that cockpit. I called my mother. The only time in my life I cried to her on the phone, not as an officer. As a daughter sitting on the edge of a cot, 11,000 kilometers from anyone who was supposed to love her, hoping for 3 words. I believe you. She listened without interrupting. For one fragile second, I thought, maybe this is the thing that finally breaks through. Maybe hearing your kid's voice crack is the sound that overrides everything else. She waited until I'd gone quiet. Then, flat, almost bored, I told you the military wasn't a place for someone like you. And she hung up. No goodbye. I held the phone to my ear for another 11 seconds, watching the second hand on the wall clock across from my cot, before I understood she was already gone. That in some sense, she'd always been gone. 2 days later, my husband called. Not to ask if I was safe. Not to say he'd read the story and knew it was wrong. He wanted my current mailing address to send divorce papers. He'd read the headline before he thought to check on his wife. I need this settled before it touches my clearance, was the closest he came to an explanation. The only one who held the line was my commanding officer, a brigadier general named Alvarez. Quiet transfer to a classified file, my name scrubbed from anything Whitford could access. A cover title, Administrative Liaison, built to make me invisible to anyone hunting for a pilot. He shielded me from the back channel campaign Whitford was running and gave me the one thing nobody else offered, a reason to wait instead of burn the whole thing down. You don't need to be cleared today, he told me, standing in a windowless office at NDHQ. You need to survive long enough to be cleared later. And when that day comes, I'll be there. That's not a favor, that's an order. Understood? Yes, sir. Good. Now go be invisible. Be excellent at it. I came back to myself in the church parking lot. 10 years had passed since Kandahar. 3,650 days, and my mother had never once, not a call, not a text, not at Christmas, not on a birthday, asked how I'd survived any of it. Not the storm, not the charges, not the divorce. Not the nights when staying alive was a decision I had to make fresh, every single hour, like renewing a lease on my own life. But Hugh had kept clippings of a call sign he wasn't even sure was me. Alvarez had kept his word. And the kid whose fingers had locked onto my collar, a sergeant now, still sent me a Christmas card every year with nothing inside but his name in handwriting that had gotten steadier. Tomorrow, in Ottawa, memory was going to cost somebody something. The reception scattered fast after that, the way crowds do when they've witnessed something they don't know how to file. My mother went back inside without a word. My Aunt Linda caught Hugh's eye at the door and gave him a nod that needed no translation. I was pulling my keys out when Hugh fell into step beside me without asking, the way one soldier walks next to another. He stopped a respectful distance off, close enough to talk, far enough that I could walk away clean if I needed to. You don't have to say anything, he said. I just want you to know one thing. He held out the manila folder. First time I saw a clipping with that call sign was about 2 years after Kandahar. Wasn't sure it was you. Cut it out anyway. Figured, what if it was? I looked down at the first clipping. My hands didn't shake, but it took me a few seconds before I could look up. This was the first time in a decade that someone had paid attention and kept proof. Not out of obligation, but because they chose to. Why'd you keep them? My voice came out flat, not grateful. Hugh let out a short laugh. Because the night that bird came down through that storm, I thought I was watching an angel work. Spent a long while afterward wondering if anyone in the world knew what she'd done. Answer was no. Figured at least one person should hold the proof. Something tightened behind my ribs. Not sadness. Recognition. While my mother was telling relatives I'd embarrassed the family, while my ex-husband was mailing divorce papers, while a national paper ran Whitford's version of events, a stranger had been quietly archiving a record nobody else thought was worth keeping. Whitford's getting the Vimy Award next month, Hugh said, tone shifting back to operational, funded by donations from the families of the men he left behind. He folded the envelope and pressed it into my hand. This belongs to you now. Proof you were always there. I sat in the car with the folder on the passenger seat and called General Alvarez. He picked up on the second ring like he'd been waiting. My mother caught me before I could pull the door shut, moving faster than I expected, carrying a foil-wrapped plate of leftover butter tarts from the dessert table. Her oldest weapon when logic failed and denial cracked. Have you eaten? Take these. The same recipe she'd made every year for Brienne's birthday. Not once, in 41 years, had she made them for me. And here they were, offered at 10 at night in a church parking lot, by hands that had never once reached for me without an angle. No thank you, I said, voice flat as a kitchen table. She didn't leave. Leaving would mean admitting the tarts hadn't fixed anything. Hugh exaggerates, she said, in that patient, instructional tone reserved for people she considered slow. Veterans tell stories. I'm not saying he's lying, I'm just saying it was a long time ago. Memory plays tricks. Brienne appeared at her shoulder, phone in hand, eyes not on the screen, a pose rehearsed to look accidental. Are you really okay though? Like, actually? We worry about you. You're always off on your own. A pause, eyes just glassy enough to read as real. I don't even understand what you do over there. I'm just your little sister. Underneath the concern was the actual message. Your career means nothing here. What matters is staying small enough to fit back inside this family. I looked at my sister. For the first time that night, my expression shifted, just enough to let her know I'd read every line of the script. Mom, Brienne, my hand flat on the car door, voice low and even enough to cut paper. I'm not doing this tonight. Not because I don't have things to say. Because tonight isn't when you're ready to hear them. My mother opened her mouth. I didn't let the first syllable land. Hugh isn't exaggerating. And I'm not unstable. You just don't get to find that out tonight. I got in, started the engine, didn't check the mirror. 1 in the morning, kitchen table, the only light a small reading lamp. My grandmother's Bible was open to the page it always fell open to, the spine softened by decades of the same crease. I didn't need to read the verse. I needed to see it. Whom shall I send? Who will go for us? It had carried me through the years after Kandahar, when the distance between staying alive and quitting was thinner than that page. Tonight it carried different weight, not a battlefield in sand, but a hotel ballroom in Ottawa, where a coward was about to accept an award funded by the families of men he'd left behind. Who will go? I pressed my palm to the page. Here I am, send me. I went to the closet and pulled my dress uniform out from under its garment bag, laid it across the bed, ribbons in regulation order, the wings stitched to the sleeve, each metal a chapter of a life my mother had never once opened. My phone buzzed. Alvarez. Figured you'd call, he said. Whitford's in Ottawa tomorrow night. I know. The Kandahar files, you said they were partially declassified last month. Not public yet, but I've got a certified copy. The withdrawal order, his signature, the after-action report. Everyone they left behind, listed by name. A decade. That signature had been sitting in a file while Whitford climbed podiums and shook hands with cabinet ministers. Will you be there? I asked. Already booked the flight. Front row. I lay down for 4 hours, same protocol I'd used before every mission that mattered. Woke before the alarm, stood in front of the mirror. The face looking back wasn't younger, wasn't softer after everything, but it was clearer about what it wanted than it had been in a long time. I remembered my mother's words at the reception, flying a desk and calling it a career, and felt nothing but stillness, the kind you have right before wheels up into weather you chose to fly into. If you've ever spent years being the one nobody looked at twice in your own family, hit like. Let me know I'm not the only one. And if you've got a story like this, leave it below. Sometimes saying it out loud is the only thing that makes it lighter. The Chateau Laurier ballroom smelled like good wine and better cologne. Chandeliers, marble, a red carpet from the doors to the head table, the particular ease of people who'd never once breathed in anything that burned. Hugh walked in beside me. I wore the dress uniform, not for show, but because it was the only language everyone in that room understood without translation. Anyone who clocked the eagles on my shoulder stopped mid-stride. A man in a tailored suit, champagne flute tilted at the angle of someone who belonged, stepped into my path. Colonel, I don't have you on the list. I'm not on the list, I said. I'm here as a witness. He swallowed hard and vanished into the crowd. Across the room I spotted Whitford at the center of a knot of donors and a junior cabinet minister, silver hair combed back, wearing the ease of a man who'd been honored so often he'd mistaken the costume for the character. His eyes hit my uniform from across the room. The smile didn't vanish, it drained, the way color leaves a face when blood drops to the feet. First he registered the rank, then the ribbons, read the way any career soldier reads ribbons, by weight, by rarity. Then, behind all of it, the face he'd spent a decade trying to erase from every official record. The pilot he'd ordered left behind, the one who'd had the audacity to survive. I didn't change pace, didn't detour, walked straight to an unreserved table near the center, sat, placed both hands flat on the cloth like a card player showing she's holding nothing and needs nothing. 4 seconds in, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds out. Whitford came to my table before the program started because he couldn't leave me sitting there unaddressed. Colonel Whitfield. He extended his hand, palm open, projecting warmth he didn't feel. You look well. The sentence was surveillance dressed as politeness. I see you. I'm tracking your position. I let the silence stretch 3 full seconds. Well enough to remember every detail of Kandahar General. The word general came out with the exact weight of a woman who knew precisely what the title was worth and precisely what it wasn't. He lowered his hand. The smile didn't return. He walked back toward the podium, shoulders locked too high, stride too fast for a man supposedly at ease in his own evening. He'd just shown me he was scared. That was his second mistake of the night, and his first had been showing up. Hugh leaned in. Your mother and sister are at the back, by the doors. I didn't turn around. I'd clocked them the moment we walked in. My mother had come to see for herself whether I was who Hugh claimed or just the embarrassment she'd decided I was 25 years ago. I wasn't surprised. I nodded once. Good. They need to see this. The program opened with an MC reciting Whitford's record, decisive leadership, unwavering commitment to the people who served under him. Every line landed like a slap against everyone in the room who'd actually bled for those words. I didn't clap. Sat with my spine like a steel rod, eyes on him, unblinking, he felt it. I watched his fingers grip the podium edge a fraction tighter every time his gaze swept past my table. Fear rewrote his script in real time. That was his mistake. Sadly, he said, voice shifting into rehearsed sorrow, Some of those who've served can't fully process the trauma. They build myths to disguise their own lapses. Insubordination gets repackaged as heroism. But those of us who were truly there, we know the difference. He looked straight at my table on that last line, aimed it like a rifle. He had no idea he'd just walked into a kill zone. A chair scraped, sharp enough to cut through the polish of the room. Hugh stood up, one hand on the chair back, shoulders square like 68 years, and 2 knee replacements had never happened. I was there. 4 words, no microphone, none needed. His voice filled every corner of that ballroom, every head turned. Whitford's face went dark. Hugh, this isn't the venue. Hugh didn't raise his voice. He loaded it, which was worse. He pointed straight at me, arms steady. This woman flew a helicopter into a sandstorm while you sat in a command tent and signed the order to leave 2 men behind. I've seen the signature with my own eyes. The murmur that followed wasn't quiet. It was 200 people recalculating everything they thought they'd just heard. Whitford's forehead went slick. His knuckles whitened on the podium. He was sinking, and the worst of it hadn't even arrived. A veteran near the front, leg gone below the knee, braced on his wheelchair's armrest and pushed himself up, slow. The whole room watched him fight gravity and win. I was on the ground that night. Colonel Whitfield carried me onto that helicopter herself. No extraction order was ever given from command. Only one bird flew into that storm. Hers. A civilian a few rows back stood next, silver-haired, a steel dog tag clenched in one fist like it was the last thing tethering him to someone. His voice cracked halfway through and never recovered. My son didn't make it home, but 2 other men in his unit are alive today because of that pilot. Then, from the 3rd row, a younger man in dress uniform stood, broad-shouldered, a face I hadn't seen in 10 years but recognized the way you recognize your own handwriting. Sergeant Desmond Okafor, the pilot whose frozen fingers had locked onto my collar in the dark. He didn't make a speech. 4 words, voice cracking on the last one. Ma'am didn't leave us. Each testimony landed like a round finding its mark. Whitford backed off the podium, hands clamped white on the edge, no script left to save him. General Alvarez rose from the front row, unhurried, the deliberate movement of a man who'd waited a decade for exactly this. The room went silent the second they clocked his stars. The Kandahar combat records from October 2014 were partially declassified last month, he said, his voice reaching every wall without amplification, including the signed withdrawal order, the after-action report, and the internal investigation that sat buried for 10 years. The record has been corrected. No way back for anyone in that room. The veteran in the wheelchair raised his hand to his brow in a slow salute. The father with the dog tag did the same. Then Hugh, then Desmond, then, row by row, the entire ballroom rose in silence, no applause. Just 200 people standing at attention for a truth that had finally been said out loud. I stood, heels together, and returned the salute. At the edge of my vision, I saw my mother near the back doors, sliding down against the wall, hand pressed to her mouth, tears she wasn't trying to stop. She'd seen all of it, every clipping, every witness, every salute. Brienne stood behind her, phone hanging from limp fingers, every rehearsed expression drained off her face. 3 days after Ottawa, 10 in the morning, 3 soft knocks at my door, the kind of knock that isn't sure it has the right to be there. I checked the peephole. My mother on the step, no makeup armor, plain clothes, hair pulled back simply. In her hands, a tin of homemade butter tarts, the exact recipe she'd only ever made for Brienne's birthday every year of my life. This was the first time in 41 years she'd brought them to my door. Not because something in her had genuinely shifted, because it was the only gesture left in her vocabulary. I stood in the doorway, hand on the frame, no rush, 4 in, 4 hold, 4 out. Then I opened the door and didn't step back. Maya. Her voice broke on the first syllable. I'm sorry. I didn't know. I looked at her, not angry, not satisfied, still as a frozen lake in January. You didn't know or you chose not to believe. My voice didn't rise. You had my number, every posting, every transfer, for 10 years. You never once dialed it. She tried to speak. I didn't make room. You'd rather trust an anonymous source than your own daughter, she cried. Not the crying of someone who finally understands, but the crying of someone drowning in shame too big to hold. Give me a chance, she said, reaching for my arm. I stepped back 1 pace. Nothing dramatic. You don't need a chance to understand me, I said. You need a chance to feel better about yourself. Those aren't the same thing. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Later I'd see it was Brienne. Not an apology, just a text 3 minutes after a missed call. You made Mom cry. Could you maybe be a little gentler? Not one word of accountability, just how do I make Maya less inconvenient for the rest of us? Please go home, Mom, I said, and don't come back. Not in anger. In the voice of someone who'd arrived at the decision over years of measured thought, not in the heat of one bad night. I closed the door. The deadbolt turned, dry and final, the shortest, most decisive sound in this whole story. That same week, Whitford called and asked to meet at a diner off the highway outside town, his choice, not mine. Vinyl booths patched with tape, coffee that tasted like it had been sitting since the last election. No medals on his chest, no aide waiting in a car outside. Just a man past 70 across a formica table from the woman he'd tried to destroy. He admitted everything, hands shaking too hard to hold his mug steady. The order, the anonymous tip to the paper, the buried investigation. A decade of awards funded by money raised in memory of men he'd left to die. When he finished, the only question he had left was, "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" I looked at him. Calm, no anger, no satisfaction, because hatred is dead weight on a march. I used those 10 years to get stronger, to climb, to bring people home who needed bringing home. Every rank, every file, every soldier I got out, that happened because I refused to let you be the whole story of my life. I let that sit. My career, my standing, the fact that I'm still here, that's the worst sentence you'll ever serve. You carry it every day from now on, there's no appeal. I left cash on the table and walked out into the daylight without looking back. A week after Ottawa, Hugh called. Not about Whitford, not about my mother, just, I run a small group Wednesday nights, a community hall outside Petawawa. Coffee, folding chairs. Veterans, you want to come? I drove out in civilian clothes, ball cap low. The room was small, a dozen plastic chairs in a loose circle, a coffee maker that cost less than my morning thermos, a box of grocery store cookies on a folding table. No protocol, no speeches. Just people with cracks in their armor sitting together because the alternative was cracking alone. I took the corner seat, back to the wall, full sightline to the door, a habit I'll carry to my grave. I hadn't planned to speak. When the facilitator opened the floor, my eyes landed on a young guy, mid-20s, folded forward in his chair, staring at the floor, shoulders curved like he was trying to take up less space than the weight pressing on him. I recognized the posture before I recognized anything else. It was mine those first months after Kandahar. I stood, no notes. The hardest part isn't the deployment, I said, voice low, no command in it, just truth. It's coming home and convincing yourself that isolating is the same as protecting yourself. It isn't. The most dangerous thing you'll ever face is the voice telling you that you don't get to have peace. The kid lifted his eyes. I've heard of you, he said, voice thin. Why do they call you Atlas? Isn't that the guy who carried the whole world? I looked at him, and for maybe the first time I smiled, not the controlled smile of an officer running a room, just a real one. Atlas held the sky up so it wouldn't fall on everyone else, I said. That's what it meant for the people who flew with me. No matter how far down they went, I'd come get them. His face broke open. The older vets around the circle nodded, slow, the nod of people who'd been carrying the same truth alone for too long. I drove home with the window down, the prairie sky going the color of a bruise healing, no radio, just engine noise, and the kind of quiet that doesn't need filling. I thought about my mother sitting in her house with the family photo still on the wall, me at the edge of the frame, uncropped only by accident. I thought about Whitford, living out the rest of his years knowing 200 people in Ottawa had watched his legend come apart in real time. I thought about Brienne, somewhere, drafting a text that would somehow still make this my fault. They were all locked inside hells of their own making, the hell of judgment without appeal, the hell of cowardice dressed up as authority, the hell of choosing pride over truth. For so long, the truth finally got tired of waiting and picked its own moment to step into the light. But not me. I'd walked through every version of mine, the storm, the charges, a phone call that ended without a goodbye, a mother who chose a headline over her daughter's voice, a room full of people who shared my blood but never once had my back, and I'd carried myself out the other side. Not because anyone rescued me, because I decided, every day for 10 years, that I was worth the walk. The quiet in my car wasn't loneliness anymore. It was the silence that comes after the last round's been fired, the dust settles, and you find out you're still standing. The silence of someone who'd spent her whole life at the edge of every photograph and finally made it home. Not to a house. Not to a family that had earned the word. Home to herself.